A survey commissioned in early 2019 by San Antonio's Nonprofit Council identified more than 1,300 nonprofit organizations in and around San Antonio. That's a lot of people addressing a lot of needs. There are organizations supporting everything from animals to artists, education to the environment. So many agencies working in so many fields can be overwhelming. Where do I fit? Who do I support? How do all those causes connect with the community? One way is through the San Antonio Area Foundation, a collaborative leader investing millions of dollars in local nonprofit organizations by coordinating resources to create positive change. Where do all those resources come from and where do they all go? Area Foundation President and Chief Operating Officer Becca Brune joins me as we focus on foundations. Welcome to Bearcast. I'm Randy Langford, and this is Bearcast, a weekly interview with business, political, education, and nonprofit leaders. We're examining the relationships between all four and how each one benefits from the success of the other three. Becca Brune is the President and Chief Operating Officer at the San Antonio Area Foundation, where she oversees the multi-million-dollar agency's daily management and operations. Becca has more than 24 years of experience working at the local, national, and international levels, building public-private partnerships to support innovative programming and leverage community investments. As a Woodrow Wilson Fellow, Becca earned a master's degree in public affairs from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University, and as a Bill Greehey Scholar, earned a master's degree in business administration from the Bill Greehey School of Business at St. Mary's University, and is most recently a graduate of the Andeavor Leadership Fellows Program. Becca, thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
I've been working with the San Antonio Area Foundation for years, and I imagine most people equate the foundation with grants. It's where nonprofits go for funding, and that's huge. That's an important part of what you do. But there's more to the Area Foundation than that. Can you put it into one sentence what the Area Foundation does?
Sure. So our official mission statement, right, is helping donors achieve their charitable goals for the greater benefit of community. But our tagline, which I think says it even more succinctly, is where giving and community connect. So if I had to elaborate on that, I would say that we are connective tissue, so to speak, between donors, philanthropy, nonprofit community. So it's an exciting place to be.
Right, you're at the hub. You're at the center of the universe, more or less.
No pressure there, right?
Yeah, no, don't let me lean on you. We talk about what the foundation does in one sentence, and you put it very succinctly. What's the biggest misperception people have? What do they not know about the foundation?
Yeah, so I think more recently, more of what people have realized is we're $1 billion foundation. We're just shy of $1 billion in assets, and we're 19 in the nation, which is huge, right?
Sure.
But the key word there is assets. It's not cash assets or cash on.
We don't have a bank vault with that.
Right, and I think most of community, right, not understanding what our business model is, think that that's cash on hand, and that's not. It is literally assets that are invested in the secondary market that, just like everybody else, receive interest and dividends. And so, our funding, right, our ability to make grants is really based on how well the stock market does, just like many other people. And so, but they're invested in anywhere from real estate to for example, the theaters. Mr. Santikos left us a portfolio of assets, which includes the theaters, passive investments, liquidity. There's some liquidity there, but again, I think people, when they hear, oh, you're $1 billion foundation, I think they think that is funding that we have access to for immediate investment.
I only need 1% of that, so just cut me a check. You've worked in community engagement around the world: Bangladesh, India, Costa Rica, Mexico, Nicaragua, but especially here in San Antonio. You've got deep roots here in San Antonio with Methodist Healthcare Ministries, Goodwill, and the United Way. In your travels, in your world perspective, what nonprofit commonalities and differences have you seen? Is there something unique about San Antonio's nonprofit community?
Right. So So that's such a great question. And I would have to say that I'll start with where I think there's commonality. And I don't know if it's so much unique to San Antonio, but I will say traveling across the United States and talking to other community foundations and, even in my other work at United Way, we're very collaborative in nature and we're very resilient. And I would say the same in developing countries. My experience there has been there's a sense of resiliency and resourcefulness. I would say the same for San Antonio and the nonprofit community. Incredible collaboration and an eye towards that. Now, what I will say is where I think there's a distinct difference is, in developing countries, NGOs, right, non-governmental organizations,
Right.
It's known that you form an NGO because you pick up where government leaves off.
Okay.
And so there's a very connected relationship oftentimes between government and NGOs, i.e. nonprofits functioning in developing countries. Whereas I think in the United States, and even, so I'll talk to our own community, I feel like there's a healthy tension between government and nonprofit. And, I see nonprofits as having an enormous amount of leverage and value. And I think a true opportunity to claim some of that space instead of being, recipient of government funding. You're actually much more of a partner because are functioning in a way that the government's not able to. And so I think that there's a value to that. And I think more nonprofits in the United States should really own that value proposition that they bring to the table. So, I think that's the difference. I think, yes, there's a relationship there, but I think it's this healthy tension. And I would hope for nonprofits to think of themselves more as equal partners, right? In that relationship.
Right. Like you say, own it and take it as far as you can. Go. Don't be shy. In 2 decades, what changes have you seen in the San Antonio nonprofit sector? Growth, direction, what they need? How has it changed in your experience?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to answer it 2 ways. One is, I think it goes back to what I said about a sense of resiliency and having to pivot. And the reason, though, is I feel like the world of funding, right, the landscape around funding has changed and is changing, right? You have, United Way has become very strategic in its grant making, right? Strategic areas of focus. Kronkowski, similar so, right? Very strategic in some of their focus areas. The Area Foundation, we've been very public about that. We're going through this kind of reflective period and looking at what are we going to fund and how are we going to fund it. And so I think that because the landscape of funders and funding has changed, I think nonprofits have had to flex to that and be extremely resilient. I hear more conversation among nonprofits in terms of collaboration and co-location than I have ever heard before.
Right. Is in your experience, is that cyclical, or is it a straight line?
It's interesting. I think when I think about national foundations, every 3 years they go through a new phase, right?
Okay.
So there's a new buzzword like every 3 years, right? Kresge, does some self-reflection and they move from, funding capital to non-capital or funding education to health and human services. The buzz now is collective impact. I mean, I think, so I think that is the national. I think from a local perspective, I think we're more hardwired because of the limitation of resources. I think I guess we ride out the change much longer, right? 8-10 years, as opposed to cyclical from a 2-3 year perspective. I don't think we have the financial resources or or the ability to pivot so quickly, and
Right.
and nor should we. So I say that, nor should we.
Well, and that's kind of San Antonio's reputation anyway. In all areas, the housing market doesn't fluctuate as wildly, the business market doesn't fluctuate as wildly, and the nonprofit market doesn't fluctuate as wildly. We're pretty laid back, pretty
Yeah,
easy going, pretty steady.
I would say, I mean, and again, I'm speaking from the funder perspective, but I think
Right.
I would love to hear nonprofits say, what their thoughts are on this. But I would say we're a fairly conservative bunch,
Yeah.
like from the funder's perspective, which I think sometimes works in the nonprofit's advantage,
Right.
and sometimes not. But I think I would like to think that we're also, from a funder's perspective, very collaborative in nature, and and slow to move, not because we don't want to move, but I think we're intentional, and we want to be very thoughtful about
Very
that.
thoughtful.
It
Right.
has a
That's the word that came to mind. Is we're more thoughtful. We don't just knee jerk. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, there are a lot of ways to define nonprofit success. Number of people served, number of locations, a lot of different ways. How would you define nonprofit success, and how can San Antonio area nonprofits be more successful?
So this goes back to something I said earlier. I really believe that the nonprofit community have a value proposition that we have only begun to scratch the surface on. I think there is a way to put a economic value in the work that you do in community. Think of yourselves more as a employer.
Right.
You have a business model. You make substantial impact in community that can be quantified, that creates a cost savings at the end of the day for taxpayers like you and me, right? So
Right.
My dream would be, right, to really elevate the conversation and have nonprofits empowered to talk about what that value proposition is and have a price tag to it, because I think you're equally critical, right, in the whole ecosystem. You're
Right.
such a functional piece of the ecosystem that if that were to fail, then that many people and community would suffer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's an economic impact to that. I agree. What do you see as the biggest challenges facing San Antonio nonprofits specifically? Maybe not global or national, but here
Mm-hmm.
at home.
Gosh, if there's been so many data reports recently,
Right.
I'm going to point to the Asset Funders Network and really talking about the incidence of generational poverty in our community,
Oh, yeah.
and high school graduation rates, college completion, workforce development, and so I feel like, sorry, I feel like there are we've got some work to do in how do we create strategies and invest in programming that begins to break that cyclical sign of poverty.
Right.
And right now we're very there's a lot of conversation, especially among the funders, on how do you help families obtain assets. And when I talk about assets, I mean access to education, home ownership, workforce development,
Right.
financial literacy. How do you empower them to be able to earn more, save more, be in choice and control of their money, right?
Right. Yeah, you make a very good point, and you may have already answered my next question, but if you could ask every nonprofit in San Antonio for one thing, and I think I know what your answer is going to be, but let me go ahead and ask the question: what would that be?
So if I could ask any question, I've given this a lot of thought, I would ask, what is the one thing you wish a funder would offer you and really mean it?
Aside from unlimited funding.
Mm-hmm. And aside from unlimited funding, what is the one thing that you wish and really mean it?
Well, let's put that question out there. Let's ask the nonprofit community. What if you could go to any funder in San Antonio or in the world and ask for one thing other than money, what would it be? Because it's easy to ask for money. Everybody, that's the first thing you
Right,
ask for. Right. So now, what about the flip side of that coin? you give us the opportunity to go to funders and ask them for anything other than money. How has the philanthropy in San Antonio, the landscape changed? Has it grown? What do philanthropists want us to ask for?
That is so great. You know, I don't know that it's so much ask as it is building a relationship.
Provide.
Right. And I think being relational, right? And
rather than transactional.
Rather than transactional, and that works both ways, right? Sure. There are some funders who are very transactional, and there are others that are extremely relational, and there are others that kind of fall in the middle there. And I mean, I think there's areas for us as funders to always improve and be more relational. And I think if you've got the relationship, I think there's a connectivity to the work in such a deeper way. And the other is, this kind of goes to the asking for money. Don't just come to us when you want to ask for money. There's real value, right? There's real value in sending a note and an article that highlights some new facet of your program, or you're going through an expansion strategy or a downsizing, and there's potential opportunity for a organizational risk that you're encountering, and you just want to give us a heads up and say, hey, these changes are happening and wanted to let you know. It speaks volumes, and it really builds that relationship, but also takes it away from it just being about asking for a grant and giving money. It's us co-investing, right, and understanding the work you're doing.
Nobody wants to be treated like an ATM.
No.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree.
But I mean, I think this goes back to what I said earlier, right? Underselling, undervaluing the work. And
right.
And what I mean by that is, I'll be in meetings and, we'll have cross conversation and hear, oh, XYZ organization's doing such and such. And it's one of our organizations. And I'm like, wow, that is amazing. Now, I don't fund that program. I'm not associated with that program, but I'm impressed that an organization that we're in relationship with is doing this other body of work. And that to me is us being so much more invested than one tiny facet. We have an opportunity to really embrace the body of work nonprofits do.
That's one of the challenges I face is I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And I think there are a lot of nonprofits and funders out there who don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
So engage, find out.
Be in a relationship.
See how that works?
Have conversation.
See the value of that? Right.
I had a coffee the other day with one of our nonprofits, and just wanted to connect and see what was going on kind of in the landscape of the world of nonprofits. And so we're having this lunch, and they were kind of getting a little uncomfortable, and they was like, why are we meeting? What do you want? And I said,
I just wanted a sandwich.
They're like, am I in trouble? And I was like, no, I don't want anything. I just want to talk.
Yeah. That's the two most terrifying words in the human language.
Right.
Yeah. When I delve a little deeper into what the nonprofit, what the Area Foundation does, your three main key issues that you engage with are animal no-kill, high school completion, and growing older, aging in San Antonio. That's very interesting to me. And why those three? Of all the areas you could have focused on, those are three very interesting ones, but how did you choose them?
So, animal no-kill was much before my tenure here.
Right. It's been a big topic in San Antonio for decades.
Yeah, and I think it got to such a point where we had quite a few donors who were very interested in this effort, pulled funding together, their funds, their donor advice funds, pulled funding together and really wanted to see us move the mark and to see impact in this area. And so we essentially played initial stages of being a convener and bringing nonprofits around the table who were in this space to talk about how do we collectively solve this issue. And we brought in system players as well. The city came to the table. And so it took 7 years,
Yeah.
but very, very successful in nature, right? We are now one of the top cities with the lowest rate of euthanizing animals. And so strong, strong nonprofit network. And we jettisoned that. About 2 years ago, we jettisoned the initiative, and
Right.
it's housed in one of the nonprofits. But our role simply was to be the convener, help kind of seed that effort, elevate the conversation to a systems dialogue,
Right. Right.
and then make sure that it was sustainable and kind of jettison that into community and allow the community to own it. Same thing with high school completion. It really started with Excel Beyond the Bell, and again, it was a 5-year process, and it was kind of under our wing, and we started very much the same way, in relationship with 45 providers across the community,
Right.
representing different demography and geographic areas. But again, creating shared tools, evidence-based tools and practices that they would use in their work. And then really, it went so well, we jettisoned that to, it used to be formerly called P16 Plus, but now it's Up Partnership.
Right.
And Ryan Lagala Holland, right, is now, has Excel Beyond the Bell in his whole portfolio and continuum of programming. And we still fund it significantly. And we still fund the organizations that are working in the initiative, because again, it make the impact, it's not going to happen overnight. And so to obligate multi-year funding and to go deep in these initiatives is very critical.
Right.
And then, SALSA was born about 3 years ago. And essentially we kind of did the same thing. We did a data analysis of what are the emerging needs in our community. And, we went through a lot of data. At the table were community partners, and we landed on the fact that, well, there was a gap, there was a space. Not a lot of funders were focusing on,
Right.
older adults. And so with the increase in older adults in Bexar County, we knew that that was going to be an issue. So let's be preventative on the front end and begin to put into play infrastructure and partnerships. That's going to, on the back end, be vital for this community and the health of it. So
Absolutely.
we're 3 years into it, and we have about 50 nonprofits around the table that provide programs, services, interventions in this space. And again, working to align strategic goals and directions, putting some funding behind that. More importantly, bringing system players to the table to like the city,
Right.
AARP, to really be engaged in the conversation as well.
And it's funny how this keeps coming back to conversation, engagement,
Yeah.
relationships. It's funny how that works. Right?
It is.
Yeah. I'm particularly interested in the high school completion element, since that's where BearFest fits. That's a big part of our mission, is to help kids be successful and prepare for life in the real world. Can you talk about high school completion in San Antonio and how it compares even statewide or nationally? What's our graduation rates like? How big a problem is this?
It's wonderful that you asked the question, and a real big driver to being able to talk about this for us, and a measurement of the success of the collaborative and the coalition. And again, that is the doing of the nonprofits that are around the table.
Sure.
Without question. But the fact that, when you look at our data, we do better in terms of what the state average is and the national average in terms of just programmatically, right? The interventions that we've put into place, retention, reading levels. And so I think the challenge, though, for our community is we've got 17 school districts.
Right.
And so right now we have 7 at the table.
Yeah.
I know Ryan's working fast and furiously to bring the others, but it's again, I think that having the shared metrics, the evidence-based tools, bringing people around the table to say, well, how do we collectively want to move the mark on this?
Right.
Is going to go a long way in us being able to report outcomes that will significantly show and demonstrate that we've moved the mark. And I think the other piece too, kind of going back to the role of funders, and the reason this is so critical for this is, I feel like even for us, this conversation of data and evaluation is so important. And even more important is, as funders raise the bar and require outcomes and require organizations to align, I think it's also incumbent for us to provide the tools and the training and the resources that allow nonprofits to be able to capture that information,
Right.
analyze that information, use that information, tell stories with that information.
Tell stories. Tell your success stories. Light it up. Absolutely. You mentioned Mr. Santikos. Everybody in the nonprofit community knows about the Santikos Charitable Fund, but for those who don't, can you do a 2-minute explanation of how that works?
Sure. So Mr. Santikos passed away, and in 2015 left us his estate. And at the time, it was valued at somewhere between $653 million, give or take.
Right.
Majority of those assets were invested in real estate, some passive in the theaters, so the 9 theaters. And so, he gifted that to us. And as of December 2017, sorry, the entire estate moved over. And so we became the sole oversight of the estate. And again, I think a lot of people think that is cash on hand,
right.
But it is not. We have operating businesses. And so at the end of the year, our dividend is dependent and reliant on how well the movie industry has done. And so, we're looking, moving forward, a steady state of about $10 million. If movies do well and do better, then, we're hoping that and popcorn sells and drinks sell, then,
right.
then
stop sneaking bottles of water into the movies. Buy a bottle of water.
Yeah. But I think, more importantly, I think, it's wonderful to have those sort of assets. And it's wonderful to have someone who believed enough and entrusted in their local community foundation to want his legacy to live on.
Absolutely.
More importantly, we're very excited about the fact that it is such a unique model. It's such a unique approach to philanthropy that if we do this well, right, we do it right.
The world is watching.
The world is watching, and I think it provides a touchstone or benchmarks a different way of doing philanthropy and having public-private relationships that have necessarily, and social enterprises that are geared towards community and investment in a very different way. So there's quite a bit of pressure, right, in a good way to do this right, because I also think if it's done right, it's done well. People want to be where the popular kids are. And so, and so the hope is that there'll be more.
Here, San Antonio Area Foundation, you did such a good job with that $653 million. Here's my $653 million. Right. Yeah, sure. And it's exciting. Part of being nervous is being excited. It's exciting to have that kind of an opportunity to affect the industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Literally change the industry.
It really did.
Wow.
There's only 2 other community foundations that have similar, it's not exactly the same, but similar partnerships or supporting orgs structures, so to speak. One is a real estate company, and the other is a developer.
Yeah. People with lots of money. Yeah. That's exciting. That's how has that, and you, again, you may have already answered this question, but how did that change the landscape in San Antonio? What did that do to your ability to do what you do?
I think one, we grew up very quickly overnight.
Yeah, I bet you did.
We went from, $250 million, more or less, right? 253 million to just shy of $1 billion. And really it's taken us probably this last 4 years to really create the infrastructure, because there was no roadmap. It was again, only 2 other community foundations that had similar partnerships or structures in place that we could kind of learn from. And so we've done some fumbling along the way, but it took us some time to build this infrastructure. And I think the good aspect of that is it really put us in a space where we had to kind of do some self-reflection on, our grant making. And, with such an enormous gift and with resources at our fingertips that we previously had not had, it's not just about doing the same old the way we've done it. How do we really make impact? How do we really do this differently? So I think that was a great thing. I think the other is it allowed us more discretionary funding.
Right.
So it has allowed us over the last 4 years to be more innovative, more creative,
Right.
more responsive, and agile as we look at our funding and what we fund and who we fund. So all good things.
Right. Well, it harkens back to your statement earlier about San Antonio is very conservative. So having the opportunity to, let's expand this box a little bit and do some things a little more, not experimental, but a little more innovative, maybe. That's great.
I'm going to go back to a question you asked earlier, just because I think I was just, as we talk about this, you asked about kind of where has what have I seen different in terms of the nonprofits,
Sure.
In the sector. I think more recently, I've heard more dialogue. I'm not saying that there are more nonprofits that have figured out what that business model looks like, but I have heard more nonprofits talk about sustainability and creating a social enterprise, right, than ever before. And so that's exciting, because I think, again, just like, we've become more innovative, I think the nonprofits are looking at ways to become more innovative and in some respects, really the master of their destiny, right? The driver of their own sustainability.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, Becca, thank you so much for joining me. It's an honor to have you on Bearcast. We certainly appreciate you being here and everything the Area Foundation does. You're the heartbeat of San Antonio's nonprofit community. I certainly thank you for your commitment. And where can people go to learn more about the Area Foundation? I know the answer to this question too.
So our website.
Right. And that is?
www.saafdn.org. And if you can't get through, then you can always come to our building.
and you're in the Pearl.
We are in the Pearl, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 on
Right.
Friday, 9 to 4.
Meeting rooms, research.
We've got the Well Center. We have an enormous number of classes, training classes, certification classes,
Right.
leadership development opportunities. We have a library that anybody can use to look up funding opportunities, or we've got several different memberships to different websites that would help nonprofits.
I know, I've used it. I've been there. Thank you.